Hi, this is Mark Devine. I am a former Navy SEAL commander, founder of SEALFIT and Unbeatable Mind, and bestselling author of 5 books, my latest, Staring Down the Wolf. Super happy to talk to Dove today. We're going to get into some really interesting things. One theme is how we're kind of really, a lot of people are full of fear right now, thinking we're in these really, really ugly times. A lot of darkness, a lot of violence, and it sure does appear that way. You turn on the news and it is a shitstorm out there. But I believe, and Dove believes, that this is the storm before the calm. It is the clearing of the old to make way for the new, and we've got a very, very bright future, a future that our hearts knows is possible coming soon, and it's going to require more and more of us as leaders to wake up. And that leads to the second thing. We're going to talk about how we can shatter our origin stories and completely transform our sense of self, to move beyond ego identities and structures, and to see how we've been conditioned and trained by society and by religion and by our families, even creating what Dove calls that shadow, and to overcome those shadows and to overcome the limitations and to recognize the awesome potential that lies within every being, and to lead with more of that wholeness. That's a fascinating topic. And then leading from there into what does it mean to self-actualize, and what does it mean to transcend the self altogether? And how do we live in this self-transcendence, witnessing very present state of awareness with an open heart, open mind, in service to all of humanity, which is the future for global leadership. And it's something that we will be required to, for us all to pick up the pieces as things break down around us from the old paradigms. Super stoked. It's going to be an incredible conversation. Thanks for joining us. Booyah.
Welcome back to our delicious conversation with retired Navy SEAL Commander Mark Devine. Mark is, of course, a best-selling author of 5 books, including Staring Down the Wolf, and he has done amazing things, both with the SEALs and on his own. He has created the Courage Foundation that set records. He does a lot of work to support veterans with PTSD, and an all-around good guy, a warrior. We were talking about in part 1 of the show, a warrior in a greater sense than one might think of it. Just as integrated, we're talking about leadership in a sense that one might not think of it, in this much deeper understanding of it. In part 1 of the show, in case you didn't catch it and you want to go back, you should. I recommend that you do. You know, Mark was sharing about this identity crisis that he had at 22 years old. That is his origin story of what gives his life meaning, and the evolution of that. We oftentimes have these sort of moments of identity crisis, and maybe we redesign ourselves, or we reinvent ourselves, and we think that that's it. And one of the things that Mark and I talked about was, no, that's the beginning of the journey, of a new journey. That has its evolution, and there are all these, quote, different facets of ourselves that need to come forward, that are archetypes, if you want to use that term, but these facets that come forward to bring more of what is truly you. And I talk about bringing home these disenfranchised parts of yourselves that got shoved away, that you can bring back. And I know, just as a heads up for you, Mark is bringing on one of those disenfranchised parts of himself presently as we have this conversation, because he talked about getting his master's degree and then and his accountancy and all those things, and then turning his back on that and going and becoming a SEAL. What's interesting about it is that Mark is now in a PhD program, and he's going to be Dr. Mark Devine at your cervix. Oh, no, that's for your wife. Dr. Mark Devine, and he's going to be, you can tell her that one. You know, and so he's brought home another disenfranchised part that may not have been thought about before. And I wonder, as you're listening to this and thinking about what is leadership and what does it mean to be a leader, what are the disenfranchised parts of yourself? What parts of you have you pushed away in the societal conditioning of what it is you think you need to be a leader? Now, in that, we've been talking a lot about a lot of the darkness that is surrounding our world, and perceptually, at least at this moment. And I talked about right at the very end that I believe we're in dark times, and like anybody else, I can get washed away in that. But I'm also a student of history, and I look at what were things like before the Renaissance. There was the bubonic plague. There was horrendous, horrible times. There was the Spanish Inquisition, and then came the Renaissance. With the Renaissance, we got Michelangelo, we got Da Vinci, we got inventions, we got the Gutenberg press. It was a great awakening and arrival. And I feel, it's my illusion that I'm keeping right now, is that maybe we're in dark times in order to give birth to that Renaissance. What's your thoughts on that, Mark?
I agree. I think these things go in phases, right? And so individuals have an ascension and a descension, and ideally there's this continuous upward growth, even though we have these periods of highs and lows. Well, cultures and societies have the same thing, and some of these are long cycles, and we can see those through economic cycles.
Yeah,
and some of them you can see through history, like you said. So I do, and also again, depending upon how broad you look, like again, if you study the science of mental development from the Vedic tradition, they have even longer cycles, like epochal cycles. And I mentioned in the first episode the Kali Yuga, which is several thousand years long, and we're coming out of this Kali Yuga, and that's considered the darkest of the ages. And now we're heading into back toward the light. And so I believe that we're coming into a very, very abundant and prosperous period in humanity's time, right? I also believe that America will be kind of the epicenter for that, just because of its position in the world, its geopolitics, its geography, this entrepreneurial strength. And I think that we're going through a pretty dark period right now with our government, because the government has been basically co-opted or stolen by corporate elites. We actually have a fascist state right now, believe it or not. And that just means it's ruled by the corporations, or it's in partnership with the corporations. So they're operating things, they're pulling the strings. We saw that with the pandemic. And so that's not what the contract with the people was. And so there's going to be some rocky periods ahead. And then on the other side of that, corresponding with us emerging out of that Kali Yuga, where there's literally more awakening, more self-actualization, more self-transcendence, more light to disperse the shadow. We're going to emerge. And I couldn't give you like a timeline. Is it 10 years or is it 1,000? Definitely quicker than 1,000 years. So you'll see this in our lifetimes, us emerging into a very, very different story about what it means to be human and whatnot. So I'm in complete agreement with you. I believe that's what the term second coming of Christ really means, is the awakening that happens as we come into these higher consciousness levels. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of an interesting point, but that philosophy is all grounded in cosmic science and this scientific idea that, just like the Earth rotates and our planets rotate around our sun and our solar system, well, our solar system rotates within our galaxy. And the farther you are away from, and our galaxy rotates around a galactic center. And so all of this is rotating in some pattern, and the further you get away from the galactic center, the more or the less kind of light or less life force energy reaches you. And so you descend into these darker ages. And then as you come back, and the darker ages have a much lower vibrational quality, just like in consciousness. Dr. David Hawkins was able to measure consciousness through kinesiology. Yes, right, power versus force. And so if you're vibrating, if you're experiencing or stuck in a level of very egoic living, and you're experiencing shame and greed and jealousy and rage, and all these desires, the 7 deadly sins. Well, you're vibrating at a very low level, but those are prevalent. They were actually the prevalent vibrational qualities of the planet Earth until roughly the 90s. And then we started to shift into the higher level, starting with courage and acceptance. And so that's kind of where we're hovering right now. So as we get closer to this kind of galactic center, guess what? The vibrational quality of the overall ether sphere will raise. And so people who are like ready for that will tune into that, and that's going to help them wake up or evolve. Interestingly enough, I have listened to some accounts from yogis, sages, who say that the actual cause of global warming is this acceleration back toward the galactic center and this increasing vibration. And you actually, if you could measure, you'd see global warming on all the planets in our solar system. Isn't that interesting, huh?
That's a fascinating area. And the other side of that, just to sort of have people grasp, because the question that naturally comes out of what you're saying about this evolution of consciousness as we move closer to a galactic center, consciousness center, is, well, why is it so shit right now? And the answer is very simple. If you're running your life or your system based on ego, the more you fear loss, the tighter your grip will get.
That's right.
Right. And so the darkness, the old saying, very common, we all know it, is it's darkest before the dawn. And that is that grip that, that we're seeing around the world of these insane leaders doing the crazy stuff they're doing, and people being manipulated, is just really in many ways validation that they're losing their grip. That's why it's tightening.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. There's this desert
that was COVID, and that we were all locked down. And sure, we all got locked down, and we all can question it, and blah blah blah. But the truth of the matter is, and I find this really fascinating, and I wrote about this during the pandemic. The truth of the matter is that we are tribal, we are communal, we need people. And this idea of locking us down and making us restricted worked. But
it did.
The back end of it is this.
Right, it didn't work.
Who had a vaccine, would you have a vaccine again if there was another pandemic? Most of them say no.
Right.
I would not. If you go on the World Health, it says, here's the thing we're going to be doing for the next, if there's another pandemic. And I saw a comedian last week, and he said, I read this on the CDC about a new agenda for if there's a pandemic. He goes, I'm not doing that again. I'm going out for a hot dog if I want one. It was like,
right,
the basics. So I think in many ways it's awakened people, not in a conspiracy way, but in like, yeah, that didn't work. If it killed the people it killed, okay, and is that sad? Yes, it's sad. And should we have done better? Yes, we could. And was it caused by this or by that or whatever conspiracy you want to have? Okay, you can have those conversations. But the bottom line is, people are saying, yeah, I'm not going to be controlled in that way anymore.
Right.
It's the backfire of it is it's awakened people to say, maybe I'm not as free as I thought it was.
Right. I play opposite day, right? So if they say, right, there's no evidence that the vaccines are harmful, I say there's tons of evidence that the vaccines are harmful. Because otherwise they'd be like, really? Oh, let's look at it. Where? Let me find out. And they won't even look at the data. All-cause deaths are up by 4%. Why? Right. Why? Well, the only thing you can really point to that changed was COVID and then the vaccines. Right. And now people are starting, the more vaccines and boosters they got, the sicker they got, the weaker their immune systems got, the more you saw heart issues show up, the more you saw accelerated cancer show up, all sorts of problems. And they just simply will not admit it. They will not look at it. And yet science is coming out in different countries. People are more honest, let's say, in looking at this stuff. Same thing, the lockdowns. There was no evidence. In fact, the WHO was completely against lockdowns right up until this pandemic. And then suddenly it changed your mind. Oh, we're going to do lockdowns. Okay, well, that caused more deaths, I'm willing to say, than the pandemic itself. And set children back years and cause all sorts of stress and burnout. Crazy.
You know, several people who died, not close friends of mine, but actually the children of my friends, who died in their 30s from accidental overdoses during the pandemic.
That's right.
People who used drugs, and so I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but fentanyl was in the drugs, and the drugs were available because people were like, I can't cope.
That's right.
Because human beings are
suicide is way up.
Yeah.
Drug overdose is way up. Violence is up. Depression is way up. All the, and also food, what it did to the global poverty rate. So poverty's up, and people on the edges are starving in areas where they can't get food. All this because of the lockdowns and then the economic blowback from that. So it was just an awful idea.
Yeah.
And so anyways, you're right. People are waking up.
In all truth, there were some people involved in all that who genuinely believed they were doing their best. I mean, I use the example of General Milley, right? Because we've all seen the pictures of him going, fading into the curtains, right? And I said, and so the thing is, Milley's backing Trump. No, I think he went in there because he thought he could make a difference, and he was genuinely driven to try and do something good and steer the ship a little bit. And he realized, you can't steer this ship. So, there was just no way to manage that situation. And I do think there were people involved in the whole situation at a minor or even in a more major way were like, no, I want to do this. This is going to be better. But this is what you were talking about earlier about freedom, is until you recognize that you're in a gilded cage, until you recognize that you're being puppeted, you don't even notice there's a hand up your ass and you moving you around.
Right. And that's self-actualization. So Maslow, that was the peak, but then in his later life, he identified self-transcendence, and he died before he could kind of redo his model. The self-actualization is that waking up to the story that you've been fed, the conditioning of your mind, and the story of the culture, which most of it is virtual, right? So we live in this virtual reality, like the idea of countries and states. Like if you fly over Texas, and look down, do you see Texas? No, you just see land. There's nothing down there that says Texas, right? It's all an idea. Money is an idea. The way we organize our whole culture is an idea. The whole economic models are idea. None of them work. Federal Reserve, it's pure fantasy what they're doing. And they take us so important.
It's about as federal as FedExpress.
Exactly. I think exactly. It's about as federal.
Made up.
It's all made up, and yet they believe their own bullshit because they haven't actualized. They haven't really investigated the nature of reality, or they have, and they're playing out a script, right?
Yes.
And that script, is all about power and control, and to continue to accrue that, right? This is why the federal government and the Federal Reserve is so against Bitcoin right now, because that's money for the people, of the people, and by the people, right? And it's not controllable. Anyway, so
they're also pushing for a 1989. I spoke about digital currency, and I said there will be a digital dollar, and it will be a global money.
That's right.
And that way, and they'll sell it to you very easily. It's easy to sell because this is taking the money away from arms dealers. It's taking the money away from drug dealers. And we've got to stop the human sex slave and all the trade and all the rest of it. All those things are important. It's easy to play into those. That's true. We do need to deal with those things. So we've got to remove the black money out of the market. And how do we do that? We're going to do that with digital currency that will make us a global currency, and it will equalize everybody and help everybody come up. But now, can you spend that money, because it's now government money? Can you spend it at your acquiesce as you choose?
No.
Or are you going to be told, no, this is global warming. You can't go on holiday. You don't get that. Or you can't drive your car outside of the 15-minute city that's being.
Well, we don't like what you guys are saying in that podcast, so we're going to shut your money off for a week.
What you're saying on social media, you know, you're feeding people to think about things in ways we don't want them to think about them. So I'm sorry, you don't have access to your funds for the next 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot.
Awful idea. And that's happening already in China.
Yes.
With their social credit system, then they'll marry that to the digital yuan. Yeah. And that's really what this, you know, what this pushes for the global leaders right now. And, you know, I'm studying global leadership at Pepperdine, and they're, you know, most of the academic institutions are kind of bought into this story. Like I said, because we've been baked in it, and academics are part of that. And it's interesting to see the bloom come off the rose with all these so-called peer-reviewed studies are being revealed to be like fraudulent studies, or they cherry-pick data. And I just read a great article. A couple MIT professors sent a open letter to the EPA saying your latest proclamation about gas-fueled electricity generation, where we got to reduce that to zero, is disastrous, not only to the economy, because 65% of the electricity in this country is generated by natural gas, but we actually, all the stories and scientific papers about global warming have cherry-picked data and ignored other really important data, and that carbon is actually extremely important for our environment and actually leads to reforestation, leads to global food production. And so they pointed to the increase in carbon dioxide has led to a 20% increase in global food production. And without that, we wouldn't have been able to feed our planet.
Right.
And it's like, that's a narrative you don't hear very often. It's like, wow.
But this is the thing, right? I mean, I just was reading recently about the research done, that's medical research, right, and that something like 73% of all medical research that is done by pharmaceutical companies.
It's funded by pharma, right? And and I've been doing research now.
This drug is bad?
Yeah. The one thing I've learned from my research at Pepperdine is that every study is biased because the researcher is biased. It's impossible not to have a biased study. So like every study I now read, I'm like, okay, that's biased. It's not true. There might be an element of truth in it from the perspective that it's written from, but it's going to be equally false from some other perspective.
But that's the key.
And that's part of awakening, is to recognize that, you know, I like to say it this way. There's not one world out there. There are narratives about consensus reality, and those narratives are curated and driven by economic interests. But there's 8 billion worlds, because everyone, when you wake up, the unawakened person, the unself-actualized, wakes up to this world and believes that this world is acting on them. The awakened person wakes up to their world and goes out and interacts with other people's worlds. And this is back to leadership as the evolution of consciousness. It's all consciousness.
Yes.
Ultimately, it's all consciousness playing out. And then we look out through these eyes and we think that we're all separate things, but it's not. It's all consciousness, and we're all expressing consciousness in our own individuated ways. Like we're individual addresses in consciousness, in universal consciousness. And that perspective, when you begin to experience that as reality through deep inquiry, that's self-transcendence. Because when you recognize that you are actually the same as everyone else, but with a unique perspective and unique address, then you start to enter that unitive experience where you take ownership. Like if everything is within me or is me, and we're just having different perspectives of this universe, of this reality, I'm responsible for this.
Yes.
And if I want to see a change, I have to change. And that's what Gandhi meant when he said, be the change you want to see. And we have an incredible opportunity. Part of this awakening, our second renaissance, is that we can be the change you want to see at scale now with technology. Through conversations like this, through global movements of meditation, global movements in yoga, earth, like there's more and more people coming together. Like part of my vision with Unbeatable Mind is 100 million people taking responsibility for their minds, their consciousness, to open up into this unitive, integrated, we call it fifth plateau, where you have great care and concern for all beings and Mother Earth. And that leads to very, very different life, right? Very different decisions, a lot of compassion, a lot of peace of mind and equanimity, because you realize that it really is you that determines the outcomes of your life. The world isn't acting on you. And so you release, and you just open up to spontaneity and just this awesome power and creativity that lies in you, that is expressed in powerful ways that are unique to you. And the grip of the ego, which is always operating on a fear of loss, is completely released. And there goes the violence with the release of the ego.
When we talk about that, hold on a second, let's even go back a bit, because there may be people, and I've probably lost a few listeners already.
I do that all the time, so sorry about that.
No, there's certainly nothing to apologize for, because I'm okay with that, because I think that this is
you have to experience this truth to be able to accept it as truth.
Right. And this is my point, because it's easy. The ego wants to categorize black, white, right, wrong, yes, no. And so the ego says, oh, these guys are, I really liked Mark and I liked his stuff, or I really liked Dov and I liked his stuff. But these guys, I don't know, they maybe took something before they did the show, because this was all conspiracy theory stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I can have compassion for why you say that. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. All conspiracy has truth in it, and all truth can be perceived as conspiracy. Mm-hmm. So if you stop for a moment, and instead of looking for conspiracy or is it true, rather than looking at it as black or white, look at it with curiosity, mm-hmm. always with curiosity. Because one of my great teachers, Patasariji from the Vedanta University in Bombay, used to say to me, go study something you don't believe in. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go discover something about something that you completely disagree with. And it will teach you everything you need to know. And it taught me compassion. It taught me empathy. It taught me understanding. It taught me to not write someone off as a whack job, even though they might be 98% a whack job. But there's 2% of good stuff in there. It's like, well, what's that? Everybody else is brushing you off and is not paid attention to 2%, but let me hear the 2%. And for what Mark and I are talking about here, you might go, I think these guys have lost the plot here. And what I'm suggesting to you is get curious about the 2% that you think, is that possible? Is it maybe that part's not as wacky? Sure, go study that part. Let yourself go down that rabbit hole. And if you can't, it's exactly what Mark was just talking about. That's because you're not stepping into self-actualization and then into self-transcend. Right? You're not stepping into that transitional place of going, it is me and it's beyond me. Mm-hmm. And I think if you can't do that to yourself, you are trapped. And you think freedom is that you can take 2 holidays a year and you have another house, or you bought a private jet. And honestly, I know, because those are my clients, they get to realize that's not freedom.
No.
It looks good.
No. And there's nobody who follows that path who gets to the end of their life and says, I'm really happy that I followed that path, and just kept accumulating more and kept distracting myself and kept basically being stuck in my egoic drive to find meaning outside of myself in the world. And not a single person sits on their deathbed and says, yeah, that was great. That was the way to go. super stoked that I put more and more money in the bank and ignored my family and got really unhealthy and got burned out. And no. They say the opposite. I wish I had spent more time in silence. I wish I had spent more time with my loved ones. I wish I had spent more time in service. Time, right? Time is experienced in the mind. Space is experienced by the body. They're both mental constructs. Self-transcendence is to go beyond the constructs and recognize the reality of that which is the background of all of us, that which is the energy, creative inspiration of all of us, and to take that as the main thing.
To be willing to be present.
Right.
To be willing to be present with a quiet mind.
That's right. And that's
extraordinarily difficult.
It's very difficult. And the ego is resistance to what is. The ego is resistance to presence. Because in presence, there is no right, wrong, up, down. It is time, we get into the flow state and we say, hey, time stood still. It's because you were radically present and focused and engaged. So self-awareness practice takes us closer and closer until we experience those moments of presence as a temporary thing. And then we're like, oh, now I got a trail marker. I'm going to come back to that. And so then you keep going back and going back. And then suddenly there's a point in time where it clicks online as a permanent state of awareness, witnessing, we call it. And from that place, you get to control time and space more. You get to the experience of being the world being in you instead of you being in the world as a separate object bouncing around with other objects. And it's a radical transformation of consciousness. It's very powerful. I believe it's the next level of leadership development. We call it vertical development because you're developing your consciousness up the scale of consciousness, like using power versus force. We're talking about getting up to 550 or 560, which is universal love, and then 600, which is, what would have been considered enlightenment in the Eastern tradition. Those are capacities that every human has the ability to access with training, with development. And it's very rare that it just spontaneously happens. And that might be, accrued energy from past lifetimes. So this is the leadership development that leaders should be thinking about now. It's what we're talking to Shell Oil and all these other companies about. How do we evolve leaders to have greater capacity at all levels? Heart level, intuitive level, even insight, creativity. The martial arts term that I love, because I was a martial artist for over 30 years, is shibumi. And it means effortless perfection, right? Which accrues from mastery. Well, how about leadership mastery? We're not just trying to learn skills of how to manipulate people better or organize our structures better or just communicate better. All those horizontal skills are valuable, but we want to evolve to the highest stage, transcending the ego, being radically inclusive of all perspectives, of all beings. And when you open up to that, life takes on a whole different quality, and you make far better decisions. And the destructive decisions that have second, third order consequences that the ego usually drives, they fall away.
But there's an interesting thing, and as we coming towards the end of the second part of the show, but it's a thing that in all my work in all the years, I'm fascinated by, which is how people take on this, even their evolution, as, they're taking it on from people who've grown up in a Western world, meaning it's another accolade. Mm-hmm. I spent time at camp with Mark. I spent time in a 7-day retreat with Dov. I've done this work with Dov for a year, and and it's like, it's not an accolade. Mm-hmm. It's an evolution, and it's not. There's no badge of honor for it,
right?
But we are so conditioned to say, oh, look what I've done, and therefore I'm enlightened. No. As I always say to people all the time, I'm the most enlightened idiot you've ever met. Absolutely. And they go, what do you mean? I say, it depends on the moment. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm an enlightened asshole. Depends on the moment. My job is to try and come back to a more enlightened state in a moment-to-moment basis. But that is a tightrope walk every single breath.
That's right. It really is.
And so if I put the thing on my wall and say I'm enlightened, then I got to take it down 4 seconds later.
Yeah. No, yeah. Don't trust anyone who walks around saying they're enlightened or awakened or they've reached the highest state.
The road, kill him.
Yeah. I've gotten to the 4th stage of the 6th level. All that just crap. That's just ego grasping for attainment and proof, like social proof that they're better, faster, stronger, more superior. The abject proof of advancement is raw humility, not pretense humility, but like raw humility, where, like you just said, that, like for me, conditioning of my childhood, man, it shows up in pretty effed up ways sometimes. And I've been meditating for 40 years. Yep. I had one of my meditation instructors say, what's interesting about meditation is, like, if you're an asshole and you meditate for 20 years, it's likely you're just going to be a more focused asshole. He's right. It doesn't mean, this is why it's multi-dimensional development we're talking about. Like, meditation really works on opening up perspective, but generally the way it's done in the West is all in the head. This is why the tradition of bhakti yoga, which is compassion, loving kindness, it's the Buddhist tradition, loving kindness, heart opening, right? That's what leads to inclusiveness. That's just lead to not being an asshole. So you got to do both and, right?
Yes.
So you got to work on the shadow. You got to do the heart opening. You got to do the mental development to accrue your mental energy through concentration training, to open up to mindfulness, contextual awareness, to evolve into awareness, becoming aware of itself, witnessing, so that you become completely and utterly non-reactive and you have a curious detachment about the world. But then you open the heart simultaneously, and then you bring that head and heart into your service, right, in action. We use the term kokoro in our SEALFIT program, and kokoro means heart and mind merged in action. And that's really an example of what I'm talking about.
Beautiful. Well, we're already at the end of part 2 of the show. I want to make sure that people know how to find out more about you. And listen, if you came in somehow, I don't know how, but in the middle of this show, go back, listen to part 1, listen to part 2. It's going to blow your freaking mind. It's going to make you question. And I think that in many ways, the greatest things you can do is question yourself, question your reality, stay curious about the things that, as I try to do in my life, like, stay curious about the things you think you know. Because that's usually when we go, oh, I don't need to know about it. I know about it.
Empty your cup every day.
Exactly. Right?
Empty your cup.
Yeah, you can't pour anything into a full cup. So empty it out and see what else is there. This has been an amazing conversation, Mark. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I always love my conversations with you. Please tell people where they can find out more about you and all your resources.
Yeah, Dove, man, it's been an honor. I love our conversations, and I really appreciate you having me on this show here. So markdivine.com is my kind of catch-all website. Mark Divine Show is my podcast. I've got a newsletter, Divine Inspiration. You can sign up at markdivine.com. But if you're interested in vertical development, the place, as an individual, the place to start for us is Unbeatable Challenge. It's a 30-day challenge where I introduce you to the breath practices, the concentration, the mindfulness, this kind of continuum that we've developed to help you open up to more of yourself. Unbeatablechallenge.com. It's super easy, 15 minutes a day for 30 days. It's only $39. Like, it's a no-brainer, but it could be transformative. It has been transformative for thousands who've done that program. And that's really just a gateway into the training that we do at Unbeatable Mind.
Beautiful. Well, again, thank you so much, Mark. Pleasure and honor. And for you, dear listeners, remember that those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of that tribe. Whether you're a political or a business leader and you're committed to shaping the landscape, you've got to tap into what drives human behavior and beyond that too. And that's to be found in the emotional source code work that we do. In fact, I am Dove Barron, and I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe into higher and higher levels, because unified actualized meaning is the one monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals and for companies. I want to thank you for sharing this show with everyone you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about what it is you think you know, what it is you think leadership is, and where are you going? How are you participating in a game that's not your own, and how you can design something that is more open-hearted, more open-minded, and in greater service. I'm Dov Barron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.